today we have a fantastic multi-state team for you. We've got Jesse Ketterman from University of Maryland Extension and Maria Pipidis. Did I say that right?
Pipidis.
Pipidis, thank you. I should have asked before we got started. Maria Pipidis from University of Delaware Extension. And they're part of an award-winning team, actually, that's been developing tools for people in agriculture to better use, and people all over, I believe, actually, to better use insurance, and that's called the Smart Choice Program. But this workshop, this webinar in particular, is going to be about credit and credit scores. So I'm going to hand it over without further ado to Jesse and Maria. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Nia. As you mentioned, today we're going to be talking about understanding credit and credit scores. And my name is Jesse Ketterman. I'm with the University of Maryland Extension, and I work in the Western Cluster, or the mountain side of Maryland. Work with Family and Consumer Sciences, and I focus on financial literacy and health insurance literacy, and I'm also an accredited financial counselor.
And hi, I'm Maria Pipidis, and I work with the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension. I am a county director and family and consumer science educator. And I also focus in personal finance. I'm an accredited financial counselor and have been working with the University of Maryland for the last, 7 or 8 years around health insurance literacy. So I'm really glad to be here.
So our objectives for today, we want to work on developing an understanding of credit and credit reports. We want you to learn how to obtain a copy of your credit report if you don't know how to do so, to learn how to correct mistakes on your credit report, and then also to take steps that you can use to improve your credit score. So I'd like to start with what is credit? And credit is simply the ability of an individual to obtain goods and services before payment based on the trust, right? That's the big word there, trust, that the payment will be made in the future. So I always like to start things off with a little discussion. So if you could type into your chat area and make sure that you respond to all attendees. And maybe you can type just a couple comments of what are the advantages of credit. So this is your opportunity as an attendee to connect with us. What are the advantages of credit?
And the chat box is down, I think, on your right-hand side. If you just sort of click that little sideways V, you can type in there.
So you should see I posted the question over there on the right. What are the advantages of credit? So we have one panelist that shared that being able to obtain loans, right? Very good. See if we can get a couple other responses, and then we'll move on. Buying power, that's right. And to obtain larger loans with better terms, so that whole refinancing piece and getting a better deal and so forth. So very good answers. So basically what you need to do is we're going to build from credit to what is a credit report? So we talked about credit. So now we have what a credit report is, and it's just a snapshot of how you borrowed and repaid debt. And again, it's a snapshot because your credit report this year will be different than the one that you had a year ago, which will be different than the one you have a year from now. And so it's just a snapshot at this current moment in time. And then what is a credit score? A credit score is just a numerical representation of your credit worthiness. And there are several different types of credit scores out there. We're going to kind of talk about one today, the FICO score. There's a thing called the Vantage score. And there are different types of scoring mechanisms for different types of credit. And so we're just going to kind of give you a general overview, but we are going to talk a little bit about the credit score. And so now I want to talk a little bit about different types of credit. And you can see I posted 3 pictures there. You have a picture of a credit card, a picture of a house, and a picture of a light, which is to represent an electric bill. And those fall into those 3 different categories you see on the center of your screen, which is revolving credit, installment credit, and open accounts. And basically, a revolving credit, you're going to find that with your credit card that lines up with that picture. And you know, you typically would pay it off at the end of the month, or it will revolve over into the following month if you don't pay it in full. You have installment, which is, you know, the house, which is, you know, it could be a car, it could be a tractor there, whatever, but you're going to make a certain amount of payments over a certain period of time. And then you have the open balance paid in full. And I use that electrical bill as an example there because basically when you get your electric bill at the end of the month, you pay that balance in full. I said that twice now. On the left, you see secured and unsecured. The difference between a secured credit and an unsecured, the secured credit is going to be tied to an asset. So your mortgage on your house, for example, is going to be secured credit. So if you don't pay that bill, they're going to take the house. Or, you know, if you have a car, if you don't make your car payments, they're going to take the car. There's an asset that's tied to that. It's secured. Where unsecured, you're typically going to find that with your credit cards where it's not necessarily tied to an asset. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, again, if you don't pay your credit card bill, they're not going to come take your credit card. They're going to cancel it, but they're not going to take the items that you purchased with that credit card. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the terms closed and open. And basically, a closed account or closed credit is that particular item. You can't borrow more against it at another time. So the house payment, the installment mortgage, is typically a closed type of payment, where the credit card is typically an open type of repayment option. And then, again, there are good things about credit and bad things. When you have good credit, you typically have lower interest rates. You have more types of options when you borrow money. And with lower interest rates, of course, you can save money. And then when you have bad credit, you're often going to, you're considered a higher risk pool, so you're going to have higher interest rates. It may limit your options when it comes to borrowing. You're going to spend more money because your interest rates are going to be higher. And then you could be turned away from loans if you have bad credit because, you know, that concern of being able to pay that back, a provider's not going to want to offer you money. Now I'm going to turn it over to Maria.
Thank you. So how much can credit cost? So this was an example that we kind of came up with to kind of help you see the differences between someone who might have excellent credit and someone who might have just okay credit. And so this example is the same, right? We're trying to buy a used car, and the term or the length of the loan is 48 months or 4 years. And you can see on the left-hand side, someone who has good credit might be able to get an interest rate as low as 6%. And so then their monthly payment would be $188. The total interest paid would be $1,018, and then the total paid is just over $9,000 for an $8,000 car. For someone who has just okay credit, their interest rate will be higher. And so in this example, it's 15%. Obviously, their monthly payment is going to be a little higher. At $223, the total interest paid is more than double, right? Over 26, almost $2,700, and the total paid for that car is higher. So there are advantages then to kind of making sure you do all the things you can to keep your credit score high, right, and be considered good credit. And because it does pay off kind of financially for all different kinds of loans. This case was just a used car loan. So one of the things that we know from our work in the financial world, both Jesse and I, is there's some ideas about, about the percentage of your income that you are paying out for credit or for debt. And so there is this thing called the consumer debt ratio, and it is just a tool to kind of look at, well, what, if you sort of think about your whole income as a pie, right? What part of the pie am I paying out towards different kinds of debt, right? And so for a consumer debt ratio, we're looking at what part of the pie am I paying out in debt that does not include a mortgage. So on the left-hand side, we have a little example, right? So my take-home pay is $1,800. We've listed the debt, right? I have $200 in debt for that I'm paying out each month, right? $200 in debt that's going towards credit cards, $190 towards a car payment, and $720 for a mortgage. In a consumer debt ratio, we're only looking at everything that is not mortgage related, right? So in this case, I'm adding that up. I get $390, right? 200 plus 190 is $300. And I divide that by $1,800. And it looks like, right, the part of the pie that I'm paying towards consumer debt is 21.6%. So a little over a fifth of my pie is going toward, my financial pie is going towards consumer debt. And so we also know from the research of, this notion of financial stress, right? And what tends to happen with people if they have too much of their pie going out towards consumer debt. And so on the right-hand side of your screen are some guidelines and what we see as we're working with individuals about debt. And so you can see at 10% or lower, it's a very safe limit, and people are comfortable or might be able to afford taking on more debt. At 11 to 15%, it's still again in that safety zone, but we're getting towards that kind of cutoff of 15% in terms of having enough money to really cover debt and not feeling anxious about it, right? From 16 to 20, right, at this point you're kind of going to be feeling you're going to be overextended, and you're hoping that there's no emergencies that happen and that you may be feeling a little bit stressed about finances. And then you can see it kind of gets worse as you get over 20, 25% in terms of things going out for covering debt. Now, some of this is, you have to look at it at, how does this relate to the rest of your expenses, right? So, as an example, if your monthly income is $2,000, right, and you're paying rent of $1,200, right? Or you're paying mortgage of $1,200. That only leaves $800 for other expenses. And so in that case, it wouldn't take much then for you to feel stressed about finances, and using credit as a financial management tool. Though you might want credit to build a credit score, you're going to want to be using it very consciously so that you're not feeling overextended and stressed. So it's really a guideline, and that kind of piece of the pie, that's the way I visualize it, that's sort of what piece of the pie is being spent on debt is important to really understand. And it's a good tool to help you make some goals around how much debt can I afford, and what is going to fit into my financial plan.
And Maria, if you don't mind me adding, any type of lender is going to use some form of debt-to-income type of ratio to figure out whether they're going to lend you money and at what rate. And so we're talking about consumer debt here. This can also apply to your farm operations. They're going to look at how much debt you have versus how much income and see how that falls into their risk pool, and then they're going to use that to determine what interest rate they may charge you.
That's right. And so the more risky your financial situation looks, the higher the interest rate they're going to charge you. So great point, Jesse. Thank you. So these are ways to really damage your debt, right? So what happens, well, damage your credit, rather. So So these are some of the things that can happen that really can impact your ability to get access to credit that is affordable. And so things like, as something as serious as filing bankruptcy, but as something as very controllable as, missing payments or late payments, sort of from one extreme to the other, right, are things that are going to impact, the score that is allocated to your credit worthiness. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the credit scoring tool and kind of what counts towards the score in a few minutes. But these are things that can really very easily mess up that score and impact the interests and terms that you're offered from a lender. So one of the things that we really talk about is the importance of understanding what's on your credit report, as well as understanding what your score may be. And so this is a slide that speaks to, where you can get a free copy of your credit report. So a law was passed a few years ago that said, hey, people need to be able to see their credit report. So one study indicated that over 80% of all credit reports contain errors, and that less than 57% of Americans have never looked at their report. And this is one of the biggest things that you can do to really improve your score and get an understanding of what's happening with your financial situation. And so the annualcreditreport.com is a place where you can go for at no charge to get access to your credit report from each of the credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. And you can see those three organizations are listed here on the report. Now, you're just going to get the report. You're not going to get a score, but that's okay. So, and there's different ways you can get the report. You can go right online and access each of the different bureaus and immediately download your reports from each of those companies, or you can contact them, over an 800 number, or write them a letter in order to get a copy of your report. So one of the things we really suggest is married couples should each do this separately to kind of see and make sure that that there are no errors on each of the reports. And so, one of the things that's really important to recognize is, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, they compete with each other for the best information on each of us. And that's what they include in their reports, that information. But the report from Equifax, for example, may have different information than what the report from TransUnion or Experian might have. So it is really important to take a look at all three. You can't assume that all of the information is on all the reports. So I'll give you a personal example. I worked in Iowa for a while, and then I moved back to Delaware. And in that time, I was looking for a house, and so I decided I better get my credit reports. And so I got all three of them at the same time. And when I looked and kind of compared across the reports, they all had me working at the University of Delaware, so that part was right. But two of them had me still living in Iowa, and one of them had me living in Pennsylvania, which was where I was living at the time. And so, okay, I had to go back and contact those two credit bureaus and say, you know what, this information is wrong and you need to correct it. So once a year, you can access all three of these reports and review them. And we really suggest that you do that. One of the things if you've never done this before, I would say order all three at the same time and do them all at the same time. And because, how do you correct the errors? Well, you're going to write to them and try and get things corrected. The other way you can get a free credit report is if you have been denied credit. So, for example, if you go into the bank and you try and get a personal loan, or you try and get a car loan, or you try and open a credit card account and you are denied credit, then you can try to figure out talk to the lender and find out which credit bureau they pulled your report from, and then, go from there in terms of accessing the report. So that's another time when you can get access to your credit report. And so once you get those reports, you want to check them for accuracy, and monitoring them is really important, not only for accurate information on the report, but also to kind of pay attention to and potentially prevent identity theft. So I guess at this point, I just want to say, are there any questions about the annual credit report.com website, or any comments that anybody wants to share? Have you used it? Have you accessed your report? And you can just type that into the chat box.
And you will see commercials and so forth about other companies that offer to get your free credit report. This is, whether there's the possibility that those companies are using that for their own marketing purposes or to market their products, but this is the place where you would go for your free credit report, annualcreditreport.com. No strings attached.
Yep. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments in the chat box, so I'm going to go to the next slide, talk a little bit about credit bureaus. So as I mentioned before, credit bureaus are collecting information from public records and the companies that you do business with, and they use that information to create your personal credit report. And when you have a credit card, for example, the credit card company is reporting information to the credit bureau. And depending on that company, that may be monthly, it may be quarterly, It may be once a year, depending on who the lender is or the credit holder, the credit holder is. So that information is being sent to the credit bureaus, and and then there's a business relationship between the credit bureau and that lender, right? Because the lender then is pulling information from credit bureaus to determine A, if they want to lend to you, but also who might they market to, right? So understanding that there is that competition between TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax is important to recognize that people are going to be they'll have different information on each of the reports. And then also in terms of that relationship back with the company, right? So that the company is reporting to them. If the company hasn't reported in updated information, then that won't be updated on your credit report. So it's important to kind of understand that. And then the last bullet here is that the credit report is comprised of 4 different sections, and we're going to see a little video that talks a little bit more about that. So I am going to pass the ball over to Jesse, and he's going to share that video.
Thank you, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
Let me pull that up for you.
Seriously, I'm still concerned that there's something wrong with my credit when I got my credit.
So, Mark, what we've learned is in addition to getting our free credit report on annualcreditreport.com, we also need to keep a close eye on our bank statement. We need to watch the things that we didn't actually purchase, even if it's a tiny amount. That's how scammers check to see how close you watch it.
I have small charges on my statement all the time. I like gum. But I do get alerts from my bank whenever there's just activity on my account. Now that I think about it, I should probably look at it, even if they just put small things. Look at that. I check my balance online, check the statement and send it, or I'll look in the banking app. I also just assume that they're correct when I don't remember charging something.
Wow. So good we're doing this. Okay, so do we all know what to do if our bank stops sending us statements each month?
Celebrate?
Okay, no. Seriously, we need to stay on top of this. Even if our banks do a great job on keeping us informed of the activity that may happen, if we stop receiving statements, that could be a red flag. And John, if you're ever denied credit again, remember they're supposed to send you something in the mail explaining why. But in the meantime, we should take a closer look at your credit report and make sure everything looks right.
Seems like a good place to start. We should begin to look at our credit reports regularly. I can do that.
Exactly. And when we get our credit reports, which we're all going to do, right, we should be looking at our own information, the accounts that we have, and checking to see if there are any accounts that we didn't open. And if we see anything that looks off, we can dispute that information for free.
And we're allowed to do this with 3 major credit bureaus for our credit card companies.
Adult things, part 3.
Okay, so let's say I dedicate my life to checking my credit reports. Is there a way to prevent someone from accessing my credit reports in the first place? She's looking it up.
Huh, yeah. Apparently it says here we can place a security freeze or lock our credit reports. But I'm not sure what the difference between a security freeze and a credit lock is.
And she's looking at me like I know the differences.
Okay, here it is. Looks like they are both ways to help restrict access to our credit reports. But there's some differences we're going to need to learn.
Thank goodness for coffee shops.
So as soon as I switch back here, there we go. So you can see Experian has a series of videos that are helpful in terms of understanding your credit report. And again, they emphasize that annualcreditreport.com and making sure that you get a copy of your credit reports and review them on a regular basis. So what I wanted to jump into now is after the presentation, we're going to send out some materials. Included in that will be some sample credit reports just so you can look at them and see what they feel like. But on the screen here, you have a copy of a section of the Experian credit report. We will also be sharing ones with from TransUnion and Equifax as well. And so you can see one of the sections, one of the 4 sections we talked about is that personal information. So you want to check your name and make sure your name is accurate. That's one of the important steps there. Your address is, as Maria had mentioned with her example, it's going to have your updated address. If your Social Security number is tied to your account, your date of birth, all that information is going to be in this personal information section. The second section has to do with your credit history, and you can see here it shows that, in this particular example, on this Experian credit report, it shows it in colors when this person's 30 days behind here. Sometimes they're going to separate it between potentially negative items, but you're going to see here it's a credit card account. You can see what the recent balance is, when it was opened, its current status, the highest balance. All that information is going to be contained with every type of credit that you have. It will be listed individually on those credit reports. Then you have a public records section. Those have to do primarily with bankruptcies and judgments against you that are related to finances. The credit bureaus are moving away from this particular section, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the next year or two, because there's been concern about if the information that they have on your report isn't related to you. So it could be someone else that has the same name as you, and so inaccuracies of information can lead to someone not receiving credit. So they're looking at pulling this information out of the credit reports, or making sure that it's confirmed either by your Social Security number or your date of birth. But it's one area that's very important to look at to make sure that anything that would be listed there does apply specifically to you. Another section is inquiries, and you can see they refer to inquiries as hard inquiries and soft inquiries. Hard inquiries are those when you fill out an application of some sort. And on the right-hand side of the screen, again, this is from the TransUnion credit report. Those regular inquiries are hard inquiries, where you filled out an application at some point. Then it also contains soft inquiries, which is more about promotional information, and you can see that promotional inquiries section. Those are those credit card promotional offers that you receive at home. They've received that information. It's a soft inquiry. It doesn't count into your credit score, but it does show you that they are there. And this account review inquiry section is, if you have a mortgage or something with someone, they may periodically check your credit report just to make sure that there isn't changes in your credit history or credit report, and those don't count against you. They're just inquiries. They're more into like the soft inquiry side. And we're going to be sending out to you a credit report review checklist. This is a document produced by the CFPB, and it goes through a series of questions. So when you look at your credit report, and you can see, I think there's 18 questions on it. There's just a couple of them on the screen here. Is your name correct? Is your Social Security number correct? Is your address correct? And it goes through this series of questions that each time you check your credit report, you can just check the box. And then if there's a mistake, it also contains information about how you would correct that. And like I said, this is available by the CFPB. You can download it from their website, and we're going to send this out to you, after the presentation. So you're going to get copies of your sample credit reports from the 3 credit bureaus, so you can see what they look like. You're going to get this checklist, and there's going to be some other information that we're going to share with you as we go through the rest of the presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Maria.
Thank you. So I get to talk about errors. And I just want to share a story that someone told me once in one of my credit workshops. Her name was Mary Smith. And you can just imagine how many Mary Smiths there are in the world. Well, Mary Smith, this particular Mary Smith lived on the east side of Wilmington, but apparently, and her credit was good, but apparently there was a Mary Smith that lived on the west side of Wilmington whose credit wasn't good. And so both of the, I guess I'll just say the west side Mary Smith's information ended up on the east side Mary Smith's credit report, and so she was, a poor thing, in a dither about how do we get this fixed. And so to me, that's a really great example of some of the errors that can happen and be found when you look on your report. And again, I'll share another personal story. You know, my name is Maria Regina Pepitas, and my mother's name is Regina Mary Pepitas, and some of her stuff was on my report. Now, I have to say there's only 5 Pepitases in the United States, so you can kind of see that it can easily happen as the credit bureaus are pulling information just based on name in some cases, and not necessarily following up with other identifying information and adding it to the reports. Now, having said that, I think they're getting better at that. There's a lot more pressure for them to verify information, and in fact there is a law that kind of says, hey, credit bureaus, if people contact you and say there's errors, you have to respond back to them in 30 days. So really what it takes is it starts with you getting a copy of your credit report, reviewing them, and then contacting potentially the creditor, but then also contacting the credit bureau themselves. And so in my example, you know, I wrote, Dear Asperian, I can't remember which one it was, but Dear Credit Bureau, you know, you have me living in Iowa, but here is my current address. You have a bank account number, blah, blah, blah number, but that account is really my mother's, and, you know, here is, you know, and here is her name and whatnot. And so that was the letter I ended up writing, and then within 30 days they had to get back to me and say, okay, Maria, we fixed this, or okay, we investigated this, but we couldn't confirm. And so then it took me some time to contact the creditor, right, and had communication with them, and got it fixed. Actually, it was my mother who had to write the letter to say, hey, this card is not, this card is associated with me and not my daughter, right? So so then what happens then is the credit bureau is adjusting the information, and then the next time they send information into the credit bureau, it gets updated in the credit bureau database. So I'm hoping I'm making that clear. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time and effort to clear things up, but it's absolutely something you can do, and you don't have to pay someone to do. There's a lot of scams out there around, here, we'll fix your credit for you. Well, they can't do anything that you can't do. So it really takes a little bit of time and effort, but you can do it, and you can do it for free, right? So the third bullet on here is this, you know, what if they're unresponsive or you can't get some sort of resolution, right? Because some people's credit is complicated. There are some things that there's the, you can contact the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have kind of a complaint system right on the front page of their website, and you can issue a complaint, provide some details, and then they will investigate for you, and if need be, put a little pressure on that credit grantor to get things fixed. So handling errors. And then we're going to kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about fraud, right? So what happens if someone steals your identity, right? So one of the things you may be able to find, right, when you review your credit report is that someone may have used your identity and set up an account in your name, maybe even with a different address, right? But your name with a different address. So you're going to want to contact the bureaus and request that they place a fraud alert on your account, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. And then they will need to take steps to verify the information surrounding that suspicious activity. Many credit grantors now are sort of requesting that you file an official police report, and that way, you know, it's showing that you're serious about the fact that someone has stolen your identity. And then the Federal Trade Commission also has some information and an affidavit of identity theft, a process that helps them track it, but also helps to verify with the police and the credit bureaus that you've experienced some fraud and identity theft. So all important steps. So, okay, in the video that we just saw and I just alluded to, there's types of freezes. And so a freeze is a way to kind of create a barrier to which people could steal your identity, and they break down into these three different ideas, right? A fraud alert, a credit freeze, and a credit lock. And so I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about the differences. And one of the handouts that we're going to send you speaks to some changes that are happening around that in the future that I'll speak to. So the fraud alert is really a step that you can consider when you think that you have been a victim of identity theft or fraud. And basically what it does is it's a notice that's put on your credit file that lets lenders know that they should take a step to contact you to verify your identity before approving you for credit. So, so what does that mean? So that means is if you personally are applying for credit, then a credit bureau or the lender is going to contact you and say, hey, are you really standing in this department store applying for credit, or is it someone else? And then you would be able to say, yes, it's really me, it's not someone else. So I'll kind of flip it to the other side. So what if it's a fraudulent person, right, trying to open credit in your name? So the same thing would happen, right? Someone would be applying, the lender would contact you, and you would say, you know what, no, that's not me. Right? So it's a way to kind of safeguard your account. There is no charge for this alert, and coming September 1st, an alert will stay on your report for up to a year, and then at the end of the year you would have to renew it. That's September 21st is when this changeover will happen. Currently the days are, the number of days is 90 days. So coming soon it's going to be changing. So that's an alert. A credit freeze is very similar, and it's sort of one step further, and it can also be a security freeze, and it's a good solution for consumers who believe they have had their information or payment cards stolen and sort of are at higher risk of fraud. And basically, a credit freeze stops creditors from looking at or accessing your credit file entirely. In other words, all those inquiries that Jesse mentioned aren't going to happen, right? Your file will be frozen. And so you're not going to get solicitations. So on one hand, it can be very beneficial, but it's also something, if you're actually going to be applying for credit, then you have to be sure that you kind of unfreeze your credit file so that that lender that you do want to work with can access your files. And so you can actually update your file to say, hey, you know what, that lender I am approaching, I want them to have access to and permission to look at my file. And and then you can unfreeze it, right, when you need to. And so as of September 21st, when this new law goes into effect, the fraud freeze, right, the credit freeze will be free of charge. Currently, some of the credit bureaus were charging to both freeze it and then potentially unfreeze it, depending on the state that you lived in. Let's see, and then the credit lock. So the credit lock is sort of a newfangled thing that the different credit bureaus have come up with. It's very similar to a security freeze. It's typically bundled with a couple of other services. Currently, Equifax has it as a response to their current data breach, and so they were offering it as a tool to help protect you. Kind of the cool thing about it is you download an app on your phone and you get a password, and so then you can kind of go in to your credit file and lock it and unlock it as you see fit. But typically, there's a charge for that. Right now, Equifax is free, but we'll see what happens in a year or so after the security breach issue has kind of calmed down. So, so those are the different types of protections, and I encourage you to think about it if you're concerned about your credit and identity theft.
Maria, step back for 1 second. We had a question here. So you can unfreeze for just one lender and leave it frozen for all?
Yes. Yep. And so it's really working with the credit bureau to help make that happen.
Well, let's talk about. You mean you can unfreeze it with just one bureau, not one lender, right?
So it's both, right? So you could
that's correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So you could go to a particular credit bureau and say you're going to go car shopping and you're going to check out 10 different car dealerships, right? Each of those car dealerships are going to pull your credit report. And so you might want to unfreeze your credit report for a few days or a couple of weeks while you're doing that process, right? Or another example might be, you know what, I'm going to go to my credit union and I'm going to apply for a mortgage and I just want to open my credit report for that federal credit union, right? So you have some options. But you got to work with the credit bureau to let them know who you're, which of those choices you want to make happen. Good question. Thank you. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about credit scores, right? So up here we have FICO and Vantage. They're the two biggies in terms of who does credit scores. The little chart there really speaks to the FICO score that runs typically from 300 to 850, right? And the Vantage score in the old days ran from 500 to 990. They're more aligned now, and so the scoring, I'll just say the numbers are kind of typical and aligned between the two of them. Both use information from your credit bureau files in order to come up with that score, and both are used by lenders to determine your credit risk. So a lender may use a FICO, a particular lender would probably choose one over the other rather than using both as a tool to assess you for whether or not they're going to loan to you. One of the other pieces of information that I learned recently was the Vantage score is also including things like rent and utilities, cable and phone as part of their scoring calculations, whereas FICO doesn't. So, so there is a little bit difference between the two. And that's one of the reasons why you may have one score, different scores between the two organizations. So now I get to pass the ball to Jesse, who's going to show us another little video, I think.
Absolutely. I'm just going to go into a little more detail about the credit score itself. So now I have
Consider this. If you were lending your own money to a friend, you'd want to make sure you'll get paid back. You'd probably wonder, have they paid their past debts on time? How much debt do they already have? And who else are they approaching for the loan? FICO scores help lenders answer these same questions every day, but through a mathematical formula that makes the lending decisions faster, safer, and more fair. So it's really important you understand how your credit activities and behaviors are considered when calculating FICO scores. FICO scores focus on 5 key predictive categories: your payment history, how much you owe, how long you've had credit, if you recently sought new credit, and the types of credit you've used. Clearly, your payment history and level of debt substantially drive your FICO scores. Have you missed payments? If so, how often, how recently, and how late were they? Have you had debts turned over to a collection agency? Do you have foreclosures, or have you filed for bankruptcy? The more recent, frequent, and severe the reported negative items are, the bigger the impact on your scores. Next, there's the debt you're already carrying. Are your credit cards nearly maxed out? How many accounts with balances do you have? How much of your available credit is being used? If you're overextended, you're more likely to miss future payments. Then there's how long you've had established credit, from your oldest to your newest account, and an average age of all your accounts. FICO scores also consider how often you've actively applied for credit in the past year. Rate shopping is accommodated for, and promotional, insurance, and employment inquiries don't count against you. Whenever you apply for credit, there's a good chance your lender is using FICO scores to help make that approval decision. So it's important that you understand your FICO scores, because it could help you know whether you qualify for low rates on your next loan. Know your FICO scores. Understand what goes into your scores.
So that was just a great overview of the FICO score, and get us to the correct slide. And again, this is just another graphic representation of that, so I'm not going to go over it again, especially looking at our time. But really, what that big piece there obviously is payment history, and then followed by the amounts owed. How long do items stay on your credit report? Well, those hard inquiries, they stay on there for about 2 years. Late payments, collections, judgments, defaulted student loans, tax liens, they are typically 7 years. Bankruptcies can go up to 10 years. And then, positive items can be on your credit report forever, but they typically, again, stick with that 10-year time frame. Who are the people that have access to your credit report? Of course, your creditors when you fill out an application. Employers, some employers may want access to it, and some government agencies, like those that might be collecting child support or related to your eligibility for public assistance may have access to it. Insurance companies will look at it to determine rates, and then landlords will also do that to determine whether or not they want you as a tenant. Coping with bad credit, the first thing you need to do, again, is correct those errors. Start to work with your creditors. Sometimes you can work out payment plans, modify your loan terms, but you have to take care of those items. When you have old information in there, make sure that you delete that old information. If you have public records that aren't accurate, make sure you get that corrected. You do have an opportunity to explain items. There's a way for you to make comments that will be included in your credit report. And so, an example of that might be you got divorced, but you had credit in both your names, but after the divorce, someone wasn't making payments as they were supposed to. You could explain that in your credit report. I mentioned avoid credit repair agencies. It's not that they can't do it, but as Maria had mentioned earlier, most things that they're going to do, you're going to be able to do yourself, and you're going to be able to save yourself money by doing it on your own. It just takes a little bit of time and effort to do so. What do you need to do to rebuild your credit? Stabilize your financial situation. Again, making sure that your income is within your expenses. You can start to establish new accounts, so establish new credit. Make sure you're making payments on time. Build credit in your name. So if you have bad credit, there are some things that you can do. You could take out a small loan with the bank and make sure that you make payments on time. You could get a secured credit card where you advance the money. As you get into like secured credit cards and so forth, you just need to make sure that those items are being reported to the credit bureaus, because if you went out and got a credit card that wasn't reported to the credit bureau, then it wouldn't help you to rebuild your credit at all. Now, we're also going to send you a little brochure from the CFPB, Building Better Credit Reports, and that'll be in the information that we're going to send out as well. So improving your score, what do you need to do? You need to make sure that you're paying your bills on time, reduce that debt ratio, so keep that percentage down, keep your balances low on credit limits. They recommend when you have credit cards, keeping your balance below 30% of the utilization. So if you have, a credit card that you can charge $100 on, you don't want to charge over $30, and you want to make sure that you're paying that off at the end of the month. Only apply for new lines of credit when you need them, and then always make sure that you're checking your credit report and fixing any errors that you may have. Checking your credit report is also a form of identity protection. How often do you check it? So you can get from annual credit report from each of the 3 bureaus. You can get that once annually. What we do is we recommend that you stagger that out over time. That way you're seeing if any new accounts are opening. So you may request one in March, one in August, and one in October, for example. You may also want to check your credit report before you shop for a mortgage or something, because if there's inaccurate information, that can impact your interest rate. So you want to get those things fixed before you take out a large loan. And then that question there, review once or stagger. What we say is, when you first started, if you haven't requested them before, request them all at once. That way you can look through them, fix any errors, correct any mistakes, and then after that, you should be staggering when you would collect that or when you would look at that information. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, there's not really a need to go into too much detail about this, other than it is the Fair Credit Report Act that provides all these protections and all the information that we presented to you, and it allows you to get errors corrected and to dispute information. And so, like I said, I don't think, looking at the time, there's a need to go through it in detail, but it does provide you the consumer protection rights with the Fair Credit Report Act. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. You can put those in the chat area or the question and answer area. And like, if you could respond to all panelists, that would be helpful as well. On the screens are contact information. Again, mine is jketterim@umd.edu and papitas@udel.edu. So
Thank you very much, Jesse and Maria. Please do put your questions in the chat, and a recording of this webinar and the handouts will be available on the webinar website posted in the chat box over the next couple of weeks.
So we have a question there about, I've read that many inquiries can lower your credit score. That is correct. Again, those hard inquiries, if you fill out a lot of applications, now there is some flexibility, like if you're applying for mortgage loans and you do that within like a week or 2 week time frame, that won't negatively impact it. But if you applied 1 month, another month, and the following month, that's going to pull down your credit score a little bit.
Yeah, these algorithms that they use to kind of create the score, they're pretty sophisticated. And you know what I've heard from the FICO people is like they can tell when you're car shopping, right? And or whatever, and so they can actually adjust and recognize that and score it differently than you know, someone who is just fishing for let's say credit cards, because clearly they're overextended, right, and are looking for some dollars to help cover living expenses. So they're pretty sophisticated. And I think the other part of that question is hard inquiries, you know, can impact your score. The soft inquiries don't really do that. They can tell that too.
So with no other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Neith. I don't know whether she wants to introduce the next webinar.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Maria, so much, both of you, for such a good and helpful presentation. If you're interested in similar topics, definitely keep an eye out. We've got a lot of upcoming events. And next week, August 22nd, Wednesday, actually 2 weeks from now, Wednesday, August 22nd, we'll have a webinar on the Resource Stewardship Evaluation Tool. This is a tool from the NRCS for conservation planning. And then in September, we'll have a webinar on using soil maps. And then we'll also have one on record keeping on the farm, which I know is everyone's favorite topic, but it's actually really important. And we'll be offering some tools to help you make it a little bit less painful and a little bit more streamlined. Thank you all so much for spending your noon hour with us, and stay in touch to see what's coming up next.
Thank you.
Thank you.